Hello, everybody. Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I'm Andy Signor, and this week, with the Skywalker Saga finally concluded, I thought it would be fun to bank some videos rewatching and revisiting all of the Star Wars films now that we know where they're headed. I thought it'd be fun to go back and watch some of them, especially the prequels, which I hadn't watched in a really long time, with sort of new eyes, knowing we know how it all ends. And how does it compare to the sequel trilogy? So I was kind of excited to do this, and I'm happy to report to you that I did have some changed feelings. And I was very excited to start with The Phantom Menace, a film I hadn't seen in a very long time. And I remember seeing in theaters. Now, the first Star Wars that came out, I was too young. I wasn't born when Star Wars New Hope came out. And then I was like 1 year old when Empire came out, and I was about 3 or 4 or whatever when Return of the Jedi came out. So I knew those films through seeing them on, at home and re-releases, and then eventually on videotape. So I had seen them a lot. And my brother was a massive Star Wars fan and got me sort of into it even more. But then in my 20s, I remember actually being able to be there to see in the theaters finally a new Star Wars movie. And I remember how excited we were. 1999 was a crazy year in movies, and Phantom Menace ended up being one of the worst films of that year compared to so many amazing films that came out in 1999, including The Matrix. One of the craziest years for movies if you really go back and see how many amazing films that year. And I remember seeing The Matrix and being blown away. And Phantom Menace was just sort of like I guess that happened. It was a weird juxtaposition of no one was really amped for The Matrix, and The Matrix was sort of what I think we all were hoping was the level that Star Wars was going to deliver with Phantom Menace, and then it didn't. But I remember back in that time, there were a lot of fans, similarly now with Rise of Skywalker, there were a lot of fans that really still enjoyed it anyway. And then there were a lot of fans who were just like, well, that was boring and a letdown. That was too much of a kid's movie. All this time for that. And I think that opinion is still fair. It's definitely fair. The film is paced oddly. I would argue it's paced better than Rise of Skywalker. And as I rewatched, I really thought moments are allowed to be settled, settle into them, and moments are allowed to happen. It's just terrible direction. The direction in all of the prequels, and especially Phantom Menace, is just really poor. And it's no disrespect to any of the actors. They're all trying their best, but the dialogue is so wooden and stiff, and George Lucas just does not know how to write decent dialogue for a full-length movie. And the direction, if you watch the making of The Phantom Menace, he did not care about any of the performances. He was so worried about the effects and sort of just overall big ideas and the visuals that he really wasn't directing his talent. That has been said. Many of the actors have sort of admitted that. And it sadly shows in the film. And I think the biggest problem with it all was just the fact that, this movie about Anakin with Jake Lloyd, who I don't have a problem with Jake Lloyd. I think Jake Lloyd is a cute kid actor. He's trying his best. He's playing his age, but he was too young. He was way too young for this movie. And that's where the biggest problem with this movie for me still holds. You cast Natalie Portman as Padma, who I think is fantastic in the movies. I wish she would have gotten better direction and some better writing, but I think she really tries her best, aside from her weird robot voice. But then when you put her next to Jake Lloyd, it doesn't work. And let's go back to sort of see one of those scenes in question. Here they meet, and this sort of really sets the tone for the whole movie.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe. They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
You're a funny little boy. How do you know so much?
I listen to all the traders and star pilots who come through here.
Now look, this is what's weird. She's like the old babysitter, and he's way too little. He's just way too little. And so it's this like creepy thing that we know they're going to fall in love. And the age difference just doesn't work. If they had cast her younger and we understood them as sort of young children growing up together, and then they met again, and then, oh wow, now we're both hot, and then it sort of would work, it would have been a lot more forgiving. But George weirdly cast a small boy and like a, older teenager. And it doesn't work. It's completely is off-putting and strange, knowing that this is a romance that's supposed to be brewing. We know that as fans, and it just sort of ruins the movie in a way because he just went too far off. Like, I don't believe this 8-year-old would. They're just too innocent at that time period. Yes, they have crushes and things, but it's too much. they needed to either both be kids or they needed to go to teenage years where then the crushing gets a little bit harder. And that dynamic to me is where the biggest problem of this film falls about. It's really about them. And then the next part of the movie is about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, which we'll get to in a second. But the whole trilogy based upon this, and to start off meeting these characters in this way with this age gap being so vast, to me is a huge detriment to the movie and why I think there's a lot of problems with it. And the dialogue is bad. And again, I think Jake Lloyd is cute. If this is a kids movie, I think he's doing the best he can. I remember him from Jingle All the Way, and he did like a Smucker's Welch's or whatever grape juice has. Like, he was an in-demand child actor back then. Like, we liked him. He was not bad casting as a kid actor, but as a romantic lead against up-and-coming Natalie Portman, who had done The Professional and was fantastic, it was a weird misstep by Lucas. So that's the biggest problem. And then I'm going to get to my second biggest problem, which I still sort of noticed more of just the whole Jedi in general. It really is this weird... They're just like these monks, but they're still like this like detectives, right? They're like CSI agents. They really like sort of stepping in the ways of the Force, sort of saying, oh, we must let things happen. But they really interfere a lot with sort of their own agendas and get involved in a way throughout the whole series of these prequels that is kind of odd. And it is sort of like, politics and religion aren't supposed to mix, right? They aren't. That's one thing I'm very adamant about. I don't care what your religion is or your politics, but don't thrust either of them on me or anybody, because we all have different opinions. And so the Jedi sort of doing these political missions is odd. And so, that makes me want to rewind now to the beginning of the film as we watch the scroll. Let me get it up here. I have it here. Here it is. The beginning of the movie, which sort of really sets that tone pretty crazily. The whole turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo. Now, again, like everything is all about Naboo. The small planet of Naboo, apparently it becomes like such a crucial part in the Galactic Senate and everything that I'm still like confused. Like, well, is Naboo like an Earth? Like really popular, powerful? But no, it's just a small planet who is not getting the shipping. While the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates this alarming chain of events, the Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched 2 Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle the conflict. And that's where we set up. So again, we don't really address the love story that sort of happens in the next few movies, but is a very crucial part here because they need to meet. But this trade dispute in the small planet of Naboo, it all still sort of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And there's so much Senate taxation and Palpatine doing all this stuff about, well, they'll never believe this, and the Galactic Senate will never do it. It's still hard for me to follow it, even though I've seen it multiple times. And that was really, again, the basis of honest trailers was the Phantom Menace. And that was the one sort of takeaway I remember, just, man, there's so many sitting in circles and trade disputes and talking about taxes and things that was very odd for a Star Wars movie. All of that said, it is a kids movie. It is absolutely a kids movie. And that, again, that's the problem. Because they cast Jake Lloyd, George Lucas was clearly going for more of a kids audience. This is the most kid-friendly, I think, of all the Star Wars movies. While there is all those odd trade disputes and stuff, it's still like the pod race, Jake Lloyd as a child for children. There's a lot for kids to enjoy, and so I can see why generations attach themselves to this. But I want to sort of get to that next part, which is Jar Jar. Jar Jar is sort of the big problem in this movie for so many people and for so many years, and he got so much hate. Sadly, the actor who played Jar Jar, Ahmed Best, like really didn't even want to do anything Star Wars. If you watch the making of this film, they were like yucking it up on set. They're like, oh my God, Ahmed, you're going to be the best thing ever. And then the film comes out and they crucified Jar Jar. They're like, this is the worst, dumbest character ever. And he is, to an extent. Sort of the accent and the choices that they sort of make of, oh, Misa Dama, and him stepping in poop. It's such lowest common denominator stuff that is really silly, Z-level stuff that kids are going to laugh at. But I feel like anybody else is sort of just going to be like, all right, can we get to the exciting stuff? This is Star Wars. I don't want some poop jokes, type of idiotic sophomoric stuff. But it's clearly for kids. But when you meet Jar Jar in the very beginning of the movie, I forgot like how much of a video game cutscene character he is. He's just sort of there and like, hello, how may I be assistance of you? I am now in your debt and I'm going to follow you through the rest of the game. And Qui-Gon is even mean to him. They're all sort of mean to him. They treat him sort of like C-3PO-ish of like, there's like a whole conversation of, are you stupid? They literally legitimately ask him. And the CGI does not hold up at all. I didn't realize how bad it was. I mean, it was impressive back then. So much so that he was releasing those special editions with seemingly much better special effects, which they're not. When you rewatch the new ones, and we'll get to New Hope and all those later, they do not hold up. So that CGI is sort of still jarring. If anything, he should redo these prequels with better CGI rendered effects. He probably could. And that would be very impressive, I think, because I don't really need to see the old, outdated CGI. I'd much rather see the better CGI. But the accent, the CGI, the whole just sort of video game supporting character that he is, all makes him unlikable. At the same time, though, now as a dad and with kids, I understand why he's a kid's favorite character. Like he's silly. He's silly and goofy, and he's playing stupid to sort of get those easy jokes in. I don't love that because I think it's lazy, but he didn't bother me as much now that I'm sort of used to it and could watch with kids. He is what he is. Other points. I'm just sort of going through some of my notes, make sure I overall. Darth Maul. Darth Maul is the best part of this movie and really saves the movie, I think, from going into sort of the negative camp where I would give this movie like, it's okay, because Darth Maul's sequences are really badass. And I like that they introduced a supporting character that, you immediately see him and you're like, oh, damn, I want to learn more. Who is this? And they give just enough to sort of hint to his backstory, and they make him a badass enough character that he really puts our heroes and becomes a serious threat to them. And that scene at the end with the Duel of the Fates kicking in and everything, it's one of the, I think, best sequences in all of Star Wars. It didn't hold up as much in my rewatch as I remember it. I remember in the theaters even with the doors closing, he's sort of pacing like a cat, ready to pounce on its prey. It still is a great sequence, but the cuts back and forth sort of kill it a little bit, and it's still a little bit of a gymnastics of boom, boom, silly sword fighting that isn't as strong. Ray Park is doing his best, but there's a few moments where they're both at him, like, why aren't they just killing him? Or too much waiting around for the other player to hit them before they make their cool twist and jump. But still, it's a really cool sequence, and I like that they killed him, even though, spoiler alert, they didn't. He shows up in Rebels and eventually Solo. But I like that they sort of had the guts to do that. It would have been nice to have him stick around. And it made it confusing because at the very end, if you remember, which I forgot, trying to pay attention to things about Rise of Skywalker, they talk about this idea of always twos. That mysterious warrior was a Sith. Always twos there are. No more, no less. A master and his apprentice. And then I'm just trying to, like, who's General? Is General Grievous, I guess, isn't a Sith. He's just a mean guy with lightsabers. And then we had Dooku shows up later, the Emperor, and then we have I'm losing track. Is there really only two people with Sith powers can exist at once? The whole thing sort of still is confusing to me. So we can only have one Darth Maul, and then once he's dead, does that mean a new one can come about? Is that where Dooku came from? All of the sort of rules that they sort of throw at you gently, which I know I'm sure greater Star Wars fans than I can break all that down. It's so much exposition that you're sort of just like, wait. And then we're even watching with Rise of Skywalker, you're like, wait, does that still hold up? Does that make sense then? And then with Rey and Kylo Ren, spoiler alert, with Rise of Skywalker, it sort of gives me a headache to think about. So interesting things that are there, but none of it really answered questions that I was longing to figure out in Rise of Skywalker. But let's get to Qui-Gon Jinn, because I think that's sort of the biggest problem for me, aside from the age difference that didn't hold up. Watching Qui-Gon sort of just immediately say, well, he's the chosen one. I ran into him and I know he's the chosen one. It really is odd, because if you really think about it, he sort of sets all of Star Wars into play. He's the one who finds Anakin and then demands that he's the chosen one. No, I must train this boy. I can tell it's him. And then even Yoda, everyone's like, well, no. And then, clearly he does a lot of crap. Qui-Gon's then dead, forces it on Obi-Wan. And then Obi-Wan's like, well, now I have to train him too because I owed it to my mentor. All of this sort of just, was this the prophecy? It doesn't, when you really play it back, and I wish George almost hadn't done these prequels, and that's where my always problem was. Like, it answers the questions and shows them, but then when you watch it, you're like, well, wait, does this hold up? Does this make sense? Sure, he's giving you answers, but in the scope of it all, what prophecies are there? I guess they're ever-changing prophecies in the world of Star Wars. So the Jedis really don't know. But Qui-Gon really is responsible for everything because he finds Anakin, which sets off the whole chain of events of creating Skywalkers and finding a Skywalker, and then Luke and Leia, et cetera, everything, Rey, everything comes back from all of that. But then would it have? Does Qui-Gon's whole story almost matter? Because now with Rise of Skywalker, Emperor had a kid, the granddaughter probably would have succeeded had Palpatine not trained Anakin, right? If you really play this all down, sort of, what should Emperor have done? Should he have had better force powers like Yoda did? Just sort of like, yeah, there's darkness in the sky, but there's also like going to be some kids that can potentially try to kill me, and then they're going to train my granddaughter. It all, again, watching these now with the hindsight of knowing what happens to Rise of Skywalker, I'm left with more questions than I thought I would be. And Qui-Gon really is sort of, he's such an important character if you think about it, right? Everything falls upon owing to Qui-Gon. And then we never see him again. We see him as a Force ghost later, right? He's not even a Force ghost. We see Obi-Wan, see Anakin Yoda. We never really see him. Was he even a voice at the end of Rise of Skywalker? I don't think he was. So he's really one of the most important characters because he sets all of these chain of events in motion. And then we sort of move on. But he's so passionately, no, this is the way it is. Yoda, everyone is against him. I mean, here's another scene that sort of replays that. Let's go through some of that just so we can reiterate how it sort of doesn't make sense.
Agree with your taking this boy as your Padawan learner. I do not.
Qui-Gon believed in him.
So that's really...
The chosen one the boy may be. Nevertheless, grave danger I fear in his training.
Master Yoda, I gave Qui-Gon my word. I will train Anakin. Without the approval of the Council, if I must.
Yeah, he'll go against
Qui-Gon's
Jedi Council to
defiance
do
I
it.
sense in you. Need that you do not.
And then we're proving that Qui-Gon's always been difficult, and now Obi-Wan's just difficult.
Agree with you, the Council does.
And so he begrudgingly is like, fine.
Your apprentice, Skywalker, will be.
But so we know, it sort of says Yoda's the most powerful. The Emperor alludes it to. Dooku goes against it as we get later. So Yoda knows all this. Wouldn't the Emperor know all this too? If he's sensing the dark side, wouldn't he also sense sort of a good side? That's what's confusing to me. That said, Anakin, you would, because Anakin does turn good. He does have it. He never leaves him. So the whole, again, all of this, it just doesn't answer the questions. It's sort of, while I watch these movies, I'm like, yeah, they're okay. It gives me so many more questions than answers. I'm just like, well, wait a second. What was the point of these? Like, what? You're giving us all this backstory to sort of justify things and give us origin story, but then you're throwing midichlorians and all this stuff that you're sort of trying to explain to us. So much exposition in this movie, and Senate hearings, and how the trade disputes all were there, and how the Jedis were all, the order that happens later, as we'll get to it when I get to Revenge of the Sith and stuff. But I don't know. I don't fully understand a lot of what's going down in this movie, if I'm being honest with you. Here, let's talk some positives, though. One thing that I didn't think I was as into, probably the most touching part of the movie, which I'd forgotten about. I got to give props to Pernilla August, who plays Anakin's mother. Like, this scene's good. This is sad.
Will I ever see you again?
What does your heart tell you?
She's great. This is Shmi.
I hope so.
And this part,
Yes.
to me, is probably the strongest thread throughout the whole trilogy. This is why I believe Anakin's turn. She's great. I wish we would have had a little bit more of her.
I will come back and free you, Mom. I promise.
I wish we would have had a little bit more content as to why the Jedis didn't let him free her, and that would have built more content in his story. But she's great, and this is really heartbreaking to watch, especially as a dad. And, I liked Jake Lloyd's performance in this.
Don't look back.
And this is where he came from. She's an important player in this whole world. And they give her that moment, and then he goes off to do his thing. And she's really destroyed, but sort of dealing. And I think she's great. And then we have that scene we'll talk about as she shows up later. But that to me was a standout that I forgot about. And I think it's there throughout the other ones as we'll get to it. But I didn't remember that being sort of the pull strings more than anything else in that movie was, oh, damn, it is much better than I thought. Plus, you know where it's going, right? So it makes it sadder as you're watching it. And I just was missing a moment later in the trilogy, in the prequels where we get to see, more resolve to that. It's never paid off. We never get to sort of, it's just tragedy as it is what it is. But I wanted to shout out Pernilla August gives a fantastic performance I think people forget about. All right, so again, Qui-Gon's just going against the council constantly, and he really, really, really is pushing for Anakin to be the chosen one. And then Yoda, everyone's sort of calling him out, saying, no, no, no. There's a lot of stuff. And then we get this. Let's watch this one real quick.
Master, sir, I heard Yoda talking about midi-chlorians. I've been wondering, what are midi-chlorians?
I mean, even Jake's trying best. Doesn't make any sense.
Microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midi-chlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force.
So this was something he just sort of was dropping in there and wanted to clearly make as part of the whole deal, and then never really comes back, never really pays off, makes any sense. And then if you really know what George Lucas was supposed to do in his final trilogy, he was going to go into the wills that created the midi-chlorians, and it was going to go even more psychedelic and crazy, which I'm interested to know what the hell that would have been. But this whole like adding the midi-chlorians on top of everything else, there's a lot of plot going on in this movie. It was just unnecessary. And then it sort of threw this whole wrench in of, well, what does that mean? Anyone can have those? Or only certain people can? I mean, knowing how this works, he was sort of the boy who was grown, without a dad. He was immaculate conception. That's sort of what the prophecy, right, says, which makes it seem, well, then Anakin must. But then we don't know where, spoiler alert, again, you've already tuned out, I hope, with Rey later on, now that she's clearly the chosen one, we don't really fully understand those parents. We know they were on the run and trying to protect her from the Emperor, but how did they come about? Was that an immaculate conception too? Again, all this just leads up to more questions. So while they tried to wrap up Rise of Skywalker the way they did, none of this really helps to sort of, for me at least, any closure. I'm sure there might be books and things that you're going to throw at me to say, well, no, they did it. But look, I got to base this off of movies. The movies are what they deliver to us, and the movies are supposed to tell us a story and sort of answer things. There can be other adventures and things, sure, to add some context, but there's a lot of stuff he's introducing that maybe he didn't need to introduce, is all I'm saying. And the midichlorians are very confusing to sort of say, well, no, that's not just people with the Force. Like, it's special life forms inside that are actually the ones that do it. It's weird. And Jake Lloyd's delivery there, again, I don't mean to disrespect him. I do think he does his best in this movie. It's that script. The script is so awkward for the actors to often say out loud that that's what happens. So then the other thing I wanted to mention, there's so many dumb moments. The Gungans, they hide outside of their water base. That's like, seems like who the hell would find it? And they go hide in trees that are very easy to find. This is another dumb thing I didn't notice several other times I watched it. Like, why did you? Oh, because it's too expensive to put them underwater again. We need to have a scene. And then Padma, who's been doing this whole decoy thing that you figure out throughout the movie with her and Keira Knightley. And then she does in part 2 with Rose Byrne, oddly enough. And then Keisha Castle-Hughes in the third one. She always has some other star actress who is her decoy. She gives it all up for Boss Nass. Like, that's when she finally breaks free. That scene annoyed me too. I'm like, what now? You've had this cool sort of thing that you've been saving, and it was, I'm actually the queen frog person who doesn't really care about any of it. It was weird. It was not a strong payoff to that sort of thing that they were. I knew and it was obvious, but I'm sure audiences back in 1999, where people don't know Natalie Portman, wouldn't have noticed. But anyway, so the other big note I sort of want to talk about is just the Jedis. Again, I glossed upon this a little bit in the beginning, but they're supposed to be, monks is the best thing I can sort of think about, that are there to sort of help make sure they stay impartial and have balance and everything. And they're getting involved in such these weird political battles, protecting queens and doing all this stuff by really showing their political side. Now, you could argue, well, no, it's the dark side. So it's bad. So they're just trying to make sure the bad don't win. But, they clearly can get confused and misdirected. As, he's a Sith, I understand, but still it seems odd they're getting involved in these politics. But I guess you gotta let that go and just say, well, no, they're protecting the peace, the good people. And so it's just weird that politics, it's rare for politics to have just such a obvious good and bad side. There's a lot of people who are out looking for themselves and may take advantage of the Jedis, and seeing the Jedis get so involved in all this is kind of odd. It really does feel like a procedural TV show of the Jedi cops out in the move to sort of crack down and find whatever assassin's doing something wrong or whatever. It could be a Disney Plus show someday that I don't want to see. But that's really what the prequels are. And I'll get more into that as we watch Attack of the Clones next. The other thing I wanted to point out, Anakin really is a Mary Sue himself. He knows everything. It's really a weird connection. I didn't connect as much to Rey, but at age 8, 7, whatever he is, he's winning pod races using the Force. He knows how to put everything back together. He jumps in a plane, shoots down the reactor. I mean, this kid knows everything, and he's a kid. He's like a little boy. So it's just funny, all the people sort of criticizing Rey. Clearly, anybody with midichlorians in them has a little bit of sort of superpower that can do anything and cure all. But it's something I didn't notice the other times where I'm like, wow, Anakin as a boy really did know how to do a lot and sort of stumbles through solving a lot of problems, which has always been a criticism in the latest new sequels, but something that I want to make sure I pointed out and saw. Darth Maul, and then Darth Maul fight happens, which we already talked about. It was amazing. And then that's it. I glossed upon these other final notes. Qui-Gon's defiance really is what, at the end, which the clip I already played, is to me the most telling thing about this movie that I didn't really remember. It's so much on him. This whole story falls upon him believing that Anakin's the chosen one. No one really believes it. No one in the movie believes it. Throughout the whole movie, they're like, well, yeah, he could be. Oh, yeah, well, I guess he could be. Well, there's another. Like, it's never really confirmed. They're sort of like, well, yeah, sure, I guess it could be. And it's a weird choice. And then to forget Qui-Gon and sort of know, well, it just took one Jedi with sort of thinking this was the way it was supposed to be to sort of turn the page on all Star Wars, Skywalker-wise. And that, it's kind of weird, right? It's kind of stupid. Were there other kids out in the desert like Broom Boy that could have had this story like he did? Probably. And it makes me wonder, like, that would have been kind of cooler. It would have been kind of cooler to know that there was somebody else randomly who did it. It didn't have to have the Emperor's blood to justify everything that happened. Doesn't mean I'm saying Last Jedi was the right film, but that idea of it was kind of interesting and would have challenged things in a way that I wouldn't have minded as much. But she was still overpowered in a way that, I don't know. It is Star Wars, though. He's totally overpowered here too, and becomes more and more overpowered as the movies progress. So what are we complaining about? If you're going to complain about that movie, the parallels in the prequels are very similar to what's going on in the sequels, and so it's all the same themes of Star Wars, of millions of plots rushing through, trying to make justify sort of twists and things. Overpowered Jedi who has dark powers. The parallels are crazy. And so when you watch it again, you will see those. But at the end of the day, compared to the other ones, this one's a light-hearted family adventure. There's a lot of politics. Those are distracting for the kids. But the pod race scene is pretty fun. The effects still hold up. It's a pretty well done thing. I can't knock it completely. For a sort of sequence in a movie like that, it's fun. I had fun with it. It looks cool. There's some threatening moments. It's as kids movies go, the stakes are there. They're kind of silly, the stakes, because it's like he bets everything on Anakin to do it. But then that sort of sets the tone of he really does believe in the kid, and his stubbornness and sort of believing in the kid pays off. And then he really believes in the kid. So all of those moves sort of make sense. So the pod race scene, Darth Maul's moments. I think Liam Neeson gives a great performance because he kind of is really blinded to his service, right? And so when you watch it, it's either annoying or it makes sense of just like everything unfolds because he was so blind to sort of leading the Jedi and the prophecy that he ends up causing more damage potentially than anything else because he sort of puts this through. Now, granted, you could argue, well, no, you couldn't. By the end of this movie, more damage happens than positive. Pretty much. A lot of people are died. Jedis are pushed out and almost wiped out of existence. And all because we believed in a chosen one. And which wouldn't have necessarily happened if they hadn't connected the Emperor to Anakin to sort of do his bidding. Mace Windu figured it out, found out, almost killed him, right? So I'm going to break that thought down more as I watch the next two, because it's a thread that I think is important to sort of address of, does this help or hurt sort of the prophecy and the overall story of the movies? Because we're so keen in the prequels of there's the prophecy and then there's another, as we learn later, which we'll get into. I don't know. But all of those other bigger questions are sort of left unanswered and didn't bother me as much by the end of Phantom Menace that I can't say Phantom Menace is the worst of the prequels. No. The worst of the prequels is coming up next. Attack of the Clones. And I will break that down tomorrow, my next video. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love your thoughts. Have you rewatched Phantom Menace? Overall, I would give this rating out of a 1 out of 10. Let's give this one a 5. It's okay. It's not as bad as I thought it was. It's not a 1. It's not a 10. It's fine. There are cool sequences in it that I appreciate, and I think it sets the tone. But I think the biggest problem, again, is that sort of Jake Lloyd is way too young for Natalie Portman, and that sort of sets the whole thing in a weird place. And Qui-Gon's sort of insistence that he be the chosen one doesn't bother me in the scope of when I saw it pre-sequel trilogy, but now it adds a lot more questions, and I think when you watch it again, you may ask them too when you watch these prequels. So I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 10. Yeah, I'm gonna own that. What would you give it? Tell me down in the comments below. Where do you put this one in your trilogy, prequel trilogy ranking? Tell me down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back with more. Thank you for sticking through this. Stay tuned for more, where I'll do Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, etc., etc. I look forward to talking about with you. Enjoy your holiday week. If you're celebrating a holiday this week, be sure to support the channel if you can. Down in the description, there's ways to support it. You can just do it by subscribing, or you can join for more content, exclusive content only members get here, as well as other ways to support the channel. So thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful holiday, like I said, and may the Force be with all of us. Bye, everybody.